Usually when we talk about a piece of technology, there is this underlying expectation of visibility.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, think about a modern smartphone, right? You look at that pristine glass screen, you flip it over and see, that cluster of multiple camera lenses just protruding from the back.
Yeah, the device practically screams at you like, I am a marvel of modern engineering.
Right. It wants you to know exactly how complex it is.
It demands your attention. I mean, consumer tech is inherently designed to be looked at,
Yeah.
right? To be scrutinized and instantly categorized in our brains as high tech.
Yeah.
We basically pay a premium for the aesthetic of complexity just as much as the actual function.
But then, you step away from your phone, you step into the world of everyday household appliances, and suddenly that visibility just vanishes.
Completely.
We transition into this technological landscape that is, well, honestly, it's completely invisible. Take a second and just look up at your ceiling right now.
You see 3 blades and a generic motor housing.
Exactly. You flip a switch on the wall, the blades spin, and air moves.
Yeah.
From a consumer perspective,
Mm-hmm.
that ceiling fan has been doing the exact same mechanical trick since, the late 1800s.
Pretty much, yeah.
It is quite literally the backdrop of our lives.
It's the absolute definition of a commoditized, taken for granted utility. It just fades entirely into the background. And I think because it fades into the background, we assume the innovation curve just flatlined a century ago.
Right. We just assume it's a metal rod, some coiled copper, and like a plastic switch.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because today we are looking at a company that stared at that invisible, completely boring, highly commoditized ceiling fan and decided to inject the exact same kind of deep tech engineering that you usually find inside electric vehicles or autonomous drones.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. So today we are doing a deep dive into the business of Atomberg Technologies Limited. Specifically, we're going to dissect their draft red herring prospectus, their DRHP, as they prepare for their initial public offering.
Which, by the way, presents a really fascinating structural anomaly in the market.
How so?
Well, they took one of the lowest margin, most aggressively ignored appliances in an average Indian household and through just sheer engineering force, attempted to turn it into a high margin, tech-driven platform.
Right.
We are going to look at the actual anatomy of how that transformation happens on a balance sheet.
Now, before we get deep into the weeds, the supply chains, the financial statements, all that, I need to set a very clear boundary for you listening. Our mission with this deep dive is strictly an educational analysis of a business and its industry, relying entirely on the data provided in their DRHP.
Crucial point to make.
Very crucial. This is not an IPO recommendation. We are not conducting a valuation exercise. We are not predicting target prices, and we are absolutely not giving advice to buy, hold, or avoid this stock.
Right. If you tuned in hoping for investment advice, you are definitely in the wrong place.
Exactly. Our only goal today is to understand the mechanics of this business, like what is it, how does it make money, and what threatens it.
And I have to say, the source material providing those mechanics is incredibly dense.
Yeah.
I mean, we're looking at a DRHP outlining a proposed IPO that consists of a 4,500 million INR fresh issue of shares by the company.
It's actually a huge number.
It is. And alongside that, there is a substantial offer for sale, up to 76.54 million shares being offloaded by existing marquee investors. We're talking about entities like A91 Emerging Fund, V Sciences Investments, and Jungle Ventures.
So just to set the narrative stage for everyone, we have a company founded roughly a decade ago by IIT Bombay graduates. They begin their journey taking on institutional R&D projects. They are deep in the weeds of motor engineering. But eventually they realize there's this massive, completely untapped commercial opportunity in the motors they're designing, and they pivot.
A huge pivot.
Yeah, they decide to apply this high-end robotic tech to, of all things, mixer grinders and ceiling fans.
Which really forces us to ask the foundational question for anyone analyzing this business: why should we care?
Right.
Before we analyze a single line of their cash flow statement, we really have to explore the macro environment. Like, why is a consumer appliance company suddenly generating the kind of venture capital and public market interest that's usually reserved for, SaaS platforms?
Because let's face it, historically, appliance manufacture isn't exactly a label that gets Silicon Valley or Wall Street's blood pumping.
Yeah, not at all.
It sounds like bending metal and managing inventory in dusty warehouses.
It does sound like that, but that perception ignores 3 massive, very compelling structural shifts happening right now.
Okay, let's go through them. What's the first one?
The first shift is the rapid acceleration of premiumization coupled with energy efficiency. For 50 years, the Indian consumer appliance market was just a race to the bottom on price.
Just who can make it the cheapest.
Exactly. The sole purchasing criteria for a ceiling fan was finding the cheapest option that would survive the summer. But as household incomes have structurally risen, consumer behavior has fundamentally altered. Indian households aren't just buying anymore, they are actively upgrading.
Okay, I can see the premiumization angle, like people want nicer looking things in their homes as they earn more. But you mentioned energy efficiency. I mean, how much does a fan really impact an electricity bill?
Oh, significantly more than people realize, especially in a country with prolonged, intense summers where a fan might run 24 hours a day.
That's fair.
And this isn't just about consumer preference, right? It's a physical limitation of the legacy technology itself. Traditional fans use what are called induction motors.
Okay.
To explain the physics, simply, induction motors use alternating current to create a rotating magnetic field, which induces a current in the rotor to make it spin. But the problem is magnetic slip and physical friction.
Meaning?
A massive percentage of the electricity pumped into an induction motor isn't converted into motion, it's wasted as heat. They run hot, they are inefficient, and they degrade over time.
So you are basically paying for electricity to heat up your ceiling, which is the exact opposite of what you want a fan to do.
Precisely. It's a complete paradox. Now, enter BLDC technology, brushless direct current motors. This is the structural shift.
Brushless direct current. Got it.
Right. BLDC motors don't use brushes that cause friction. They use permanent magnets. They rely on an electronic controller, like a microcomputer, to continuously switch the direction of the electrical current in the coils, keeping the motor spinning with incredible precision. And because there is no physical friction from brushes and no induced current loss, they use a fraction of the power. We are talking about reducing a fan's power consumption from like 75 watts down to 28 or 35 watts.
Oh, wow. So which means the consumer pays a premium up front for the fan, but the appliance essentially pays for itself in electricity savings over, what, a year or two?
Exactly. Plus, the government is introducing stricter Energy Star ratings, which essentially regulates the cheap, power-hungry, inefficient fans right out of the formal market.
So that government intervention is really the tailwind pushing the entire industry toward BLDC.
It is, and that brings us to the second compelling reason to care about this business: the digital-first disruption of legacy networks.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
If we look back a decade, the incumbent advantage in the Indian appliance market was this impenetrable offline fortress. You won by having a distribution network built over half a century. You needed deep relationships with thousands of regional distributors and tens of thousands of neighborhood hardware stores.
Right, because if you're a new brand, you can't just put your product on a shelf.
Exactly. A new entrant couldn't just build a better fan. They had to convince a skeptical distributor in a Tier 3 city to give them shelf space over a brand that had been sitting there since the 1970s.
So the incumbent moat wasn't the technology at all. The moat was the logistics and the relationships.
Spot on. The product was totally secondary to the placement. But the structural change here is the explosion of digital discovery. Fast forward to today, consumers do not rely solely on the shopkeeper's recommendation anymore.
Of course not.
They have smartphones, they read reviews on Amazon, they watch teardown videos on YouTube, they discover a product digitally, validate it through peer reviews, and then, and this is crucial, they either click buy online or they walk into that physical hardware store and demand the specific brand they just researched.
That dynamic completely flips the leverage.
Yeah.
I mean, the internet just bypassed the traditional gatekeeper.
Completely bypass them.
If the consumer walks in demanding an Atomberg fan, the offline distributor is almost forced to stock it, regardless of their legacy relationships, just because they don't want to lose the sale.
That digital bypass is what allowed a natively digital brand to capture market share at a speed that was historically considered impossible in hardware.
Wow.
And that leads to the third and perhaps most vital reason to pay attention: the insertion of deep tech economics into a low-tech space.
Tell me about that.
Well, the DRHP reveals this glaring anomaly in how this company allocates capital. Traditional consumer appliance companies, like the legacy giants, They typically spend roughly 1%, maybe 1.5% of their revenue on research and development.
So they're basically just assemblers, right?
Exactly. They are primarily assemblers of commoditized parts and managers of marketing budgets. Atomberg, on the other hand, is spending nearly 6.7% of its revenue on R&D.
6.7%.
In financial year 2026 alone, that equated to over 867 million INR.
Okay, wait. Here's where I have to play the skeptic.
Go for it.
I am looking at a ceiling fan. It is a central motor housing, a metal downrod, and 3 aerodynamically shaped blades.
Yeah.
Humanity basically solved the physics of moving air with a rotating blade during the Industrial Revolution.
Right.
Why on earth does a fan company need to spend nearly ₹1 billion a year on R&D? You mentioned microcomputers earlier. Why does a fan need firmware? Why does a fan company need to employ an embedded software team? Are we falling into the trap of over-engineering a spinning wheel just to slap a smart label on it?
Look, it is a completely valid pushback, and frankly, it is the exact same skepticism incumbent competitors likely harbored 5 years ago.
I'm sure they did.
But the answer is that it's fundamentally not just a fan anymore. When you transition from a 19th century induction motor to a BLDC motor, you are migrating from mechanical engineering straight into the realm of power, electronics, and software engineering.
Okay.
A BLDC motor cannot just plug into the alternating current coming out of your wall and start spinning. It requires an electronic brain. It requires power electronics to convert the AC to DC. It requires a microcontroller to interpret signals.
So it's actively processing.
Yes, it requires highly complex proprietary firmware to tell the electromagnets exactly when, how long, and with how much force to fire in order to push the permanent magnets on the rotor.
Ah, okay, I see the distinction now. You aren't just sending a dumb, continuous flow of electricity to a copper coil anymore. You are continuously computing the physical position of the rotor, what, thousands of times a second?
Thousands of times a second.
And firing precise electrical pulses to keep it moving optimally.
You are effectively embedding a real-time computing engine inside the appliance. And once you have installed that brain, the microprocessor and the firmware, the marginal cost of adding features just plummets while the capabilities skyrockets.
That makes a lot of sense.
Suddenly, a fan can have precise stepless speed control. It can have a sleep mode that tapers the speed down as the room cools overnight. It can have IoT connectivity for your smartphone or integrate with voice assistants.
And I imagine that microcontroller is doing a lot of protective work too.
Exactly. And crucially for the Indian market, that microcontroller can detect extreme voltage fluctuations and shut the motor down before it fries, or stabilize the output so the fan speed doesn't drop when the grid sags.
Okay, so the 867 million INR isn't being spent on redesigning the plastic blades.
No, not at all. It is being spent on refining the proprietary motor platform, miniaturizing the power electronics, and optimizing the software that drives the entire ecosystem.
Which provides the perfect runway into our 60-second summary. Let's try to distill everything we just discussed into a tight elevator pitch. For anyone listening who just wants the foundational facts, what is the core identity of this business?
At its core, Atomberg designs, manufactures, and distributes next-generation, energy-efficient smart appliances for consumers, alongside proprietary high-tech B2B components for enterprise manufacturers.
And if we break down their product portfolio, like what are the actual physical items leaving their warehouses?
So the business is structured into 3 distinct segments. First is home appliances. This is the foundational engine ceiling fans, pedestal fans, exhaust fans, and a recent expansion into smart locks.
Okay, fans and locks.
Second is kitchen appliances. This represents their aggressive growth bet mixer grinders, cold press juicers, and water purifiers.
Got it.
And third is proprietary components. This is a purely B2B play operating under their subsidiary, AIPL, where they manufacture and sell their advanced BLDC motors to other massive enterprise OEMs for integration into products like air conditioners, refrigerators, and even commercial drones.
Commercial drones. Okay, just to give a sense of the scale here, we aren't talking about a boutique startup making a few hundred units.
Oh, not at all. As of their FY26 filings, they have a footprint spanning over 18,000 PIN codes across India. Their products are sitting on shelves in 46,932 retail touchpoints, and that's fed by a network of over 600 distributors.
And top-line revenue.
From a top-line perspective, they generated nearly 13 billion INR in revenue in the 2026 financial year.
Wow. So the absolute simplest way to conceptualize this company for you listening is this. Imagine the highly complex, super efficient electric motors utilized in modern commercial drones, or the precision motors driving electric vehicles. Atomberg is a company that has mastered that specific deep tech engineering brushless DC motors and figured out how to package it inside mundane, everyday household appliances.
That's exactly it.
They sell these premium electricity-saving devices directly to consumers to upgrade their homes, and they simultaneously sell the raw, high-tech motor components to other massive corporations. They're functioning as the high-tech brain and muscle powering the modern energy-conscious environment.
I'd say they identified a core, deeply defensible technological capability, and they are basically methodically finding every single rotational appliance in a domestic or commercial setting to apply it to.
Having established what they do, we need to zoom out a bit. We need to look at the water they are swimming in. Let's transition to an industry explainer and map out the value chain. What is the actual total addressable market, the TAM, that Atomberg is attacking?
Right, so if we look purely at the consumer appliances market they currently play in, meaning the fans, kitchen appliances, and water purifiers, the TAM is valued at roughly 4.69 billion US dollars as of FY26.
Okay, nearly 5 billion.
It is a large established market, and it's experiencing a structural shift toward premium tiers. But the number that should really catch your attention is the B2B proprietary components market.
Supplying the motors to other companies.
Yes, supplying high-efficiency motors to other global manufacturers is a staggering space. It is estimated at around 10 billion US dollars today, and it is projected to double to roughly 20 billion by 2031.
A market doubling to $20 billion in under a decade is massive.
Yeah.
What are the specific structural forces driving that kind of explosive B2B growth?
Well, there are two massive macro forces at play here. First, global energy regulations. Governments worldwide are severely tightening energy efficiency mandates.
So companies are being forced to upgrade.
Exactly. If you are a legacy manufacturer making millions of air conditioning units, you suddenly cannot use the cheap, inefficient compressors you used 5 years ago because they simply won't meet the new Energy Star ratings.
You're legally barred from using them.
You are legally forced to source highly efficient smart motors. And that creates an immediate, massive demand shock for companies that can actually produce BLDC technology at scale.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And the second macro force.
The fundamental rewiring of the global supply chain, which is commonly referred to as the China Plus One strategy.
Right, everyone's talking about that.
For the better part of 3 decades, the entire world relied almost exclusively on China for cheap, abundant electronic components, specifically complex motors and printed circuit boards. But that landscape has fractured.
Due to tariffs, COVID disruptions, all of that.
Between rising geopolitical tensions, catastrophic supply chain shocks experienced in recent years, and increasing labor costs, major global and Indian OEMs are aggressively seeking to de-risk. They are actively hunting for domestic manufacturers who can produce these critical, complex components outside of China, but at a comparable scale and quality.
Which positions a domestic Indian manufacturer with deep R&D capabilities right in the crosshairs of a massive demand vacuum.
Exactly.
Let's ground this abstract market data into reality. Walk us through the actual industry value chain. How does a pile of raw earthly materials eventually become a smart fan mounted to a ceiling?
Sure. So every manufacturing value chain starts with raw materials and inputs. For Atomberg, this means sourcing massive quantities of copper for winding, electrical steel for the stators, permanent magnets, often utilizing neodymium plastics for the casings, and the crucial semiconductor chips and microcontrollers.
And a lot of those come from overseas, I assume.
Yes, it's vital to note that many of these raw inputs, especially the rare earth magnets and semiconductors, are sourced on the global market.
Okay, so once they acquire the raw materials, the next step is processing and manufacturing.
Correct. And this is where the deep tech comes into play. They don't just bolt pre-made parts together. They take the raw copper and steel and run it through automated stator winding machines. They take the bare fiberglass boards and run them through surface mount technology lines to physically solder the microchips and resistors onto the printed circuit boards.
And where does all this happen?
All of this high-precision assembly occurs primarily at their massive integrated manufacturing facility in Chakan, Kun.
Which highlights the third step, which is the company's actual position within this value chain. Atomberg sits dead center. but they wield an outsized amount of control. They aren't just a white label brand importing generic fans from Shenzhen and slapping a logo on the box.
Not at all. They maintain absolute control over the intellectual property. They design the hardware architecture, they write the proprietary firmware that governs the motor, and they control the critical manufacturing nodes.
Even the look of it, right.
Yeah, even for aesthetic components like surface finishing, they operate their own in-house paint shops just to maintain quality control over the final premium look.
Okay, step 4 is the logistics of distribution. The physical product has to move.
Right. The completed units are shipped from the check-in mother warehouse to various regional hubs strategically located across the country. From there, the chain forks.
It either goes offline or online.
The product is either dispatched to the massive network of traditional offline distributors, or it is sent to direct-to-consumer e-commerce fulfillment centers for platforms like Amazon and Flipkart.
And the final step is the end market. This is the consumer walking into a store or clicking a link, willing to pay a 30% premium because they trust the technology will lower their electricity bill and, not break down during a heat wave. Or, in the B2B context, it's an aerospace manufacturer buying a batch of highly calibrated drone motors.
When you look at the entirety of that value chain, from raw material to end consumer, their strategy becomes very, very clear.
It feels incredibly analogous to the Apple playbook.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Apple doesn't just write software in a vacuum, and they certainly don't just assemble generic phone parts. They design the silicon chip from the atomic level. They write the operating system custom-tailored to that specific silicon. They rigorously control the manufacturing tolerances of the hardware casing. And through that vertical integration, they completely dominate the premium tier of the market.
Exactly.
Atomberg is designing the BLDC silicon and magnetics, writing the firmware for that specific motor, controlling the final assembly, and positioning themselves as the premium, untouchable tier of household appliances.
The analogy holds up incredibly well. When you integrate proprietary hardware with proprietary software, you dig a really deep economic moat. A legacy fan company is phenomenal at bending sheet metal and negotiating with distributors. They do not have the institutional DNA required to write embedded software or manage surface mount technology lines for microprocessors.
And changing that DNA is expensive.
Replicating that integration takes years and hundreds of millions in R&D, which incumbents are incredibly hesitant to spend.
All of this theory, controlling the value chain, building the Apple of appliances, it sounds fantastic when you're pitching venture capitalists in a boardroom. But we need to see how the business actually works on the ground level. Let's transition into their unit economics. Let's trace a single fan and see how the money changes hands.
Right, and to understand their unit economics, we have to revisit how they source, because there is a very specific phrase used in the DRHP. They describe their manufacturing approach as relying on a co-developed vendor ecosystem.
Co-developed vendor ecosystem. In the context of a company that claims to control its manufacturing, what does that actually mean in practice?
It is a hybrid model. It's designed to keep the company relatively asset-light while retaining absolute control over their core IP.
Okay, give me an example.
Think of the plastic injection molding required for the fan casings or the mixer grinder bodies. Buying dozens of massive industrial injection molding machines and the warehouse space to house them requires staggering capital expenditure. Atomberg wants to spend its capital on R&D, not on plastic molding.
So they outsource it. But doesn't that risk quality control?
This is where the co-developed part comes in. They don't just buy off-the-shelf plastic parts from a random vendor. Atomberg's engineers design the proprietary 3D molds themselves. They then hand those highly specific molds to captive third-party vendors. But Atomberg embeds its own quality control personnel and digital tracking systems directly onto the vendor's factory floor.
Oh, wow.
So the vendor provides the heavy machinery and the labor, but Atomberg dictates the exact material specifications and quality tolerances.
I see. It's like a fast food franchise model applied to manufacturing. The parent company owns the secret recipe, dictates the exact temperature of the fryers, and inspects the store, but the franchisee owns the physical building and hires the cooks.
That's a perfect way to put it.
It allows Atomberg to scale production infinitely without blowing up their balance sheet with heavy capex, yet they never surrender control of the aesthetics or the intellectual property.
Exactly. And once those components are co-developed, they enter the value-add phase. The parts arrive at the Chakan facility. This is a massive operation with an annual installed capacity of 6.24 million units just for the home appliances segment.
Over 6 million units.
Here, they execute the highly complex automated stator winding, the rotor assembly, the PCB manufacturing, and the final marriage of the electronic brain to the physical hardware.
Next comes the sale. The finished product leaves the factory and is pushed out to that network of 626 distributors, trickling down to the 46,932 retail counters. Or, alternatively, it bypasses the physical chain entirely and it goes direct to consumer via digital channels.
Which brings us to the most critical number in the entire unit economics discussion: the margin.
Yes, let's talk numbers.
When that consumer finalizes the purchase, how much of that money is retained by Atomberg? Well, the DRHP reveals a product margin of 42.97%.
Okay, that number requires context because in the hardware world, 43% is exceptionally high.
It is in a different stratosphere for this specific industry. The DRHP explicitly notes that the average product margin among listed, scaled consumer appliance companies operating in India is roughly 29.7%.
Wait, 29.7%.
Yep. Atomberg is squeezing out an extra 13% of margin on every single unit sold compared to legacy competitors.
How is that mathematically possible? If the legacy companies have 50 years of supply chain efficiencies and economies of scale, how is a 10-year-old company beating them on unit profitability by 13%?
It comes down to two strategic advantages. First, the vertical integration we discussed. Because Atomberg manufactures its own BLDC motors and PCBs, they are capturing the value internally.
Instead of paying a supplier markup.
Exactly. Legacy companies often have to buy complex motors or electronic controllers from third-party suppliers, which means the supplier is taking a 15% or 20% markup before the appliance company even touches the part. Atomberg eliminated that middleman margin entirely.
And the second advantage.
Second, because of their superior technology and sleek design, they command a premium price point. They are inherently insulated from the brutal, margin-crushing price wars happening at the bottom of the commodity market.
But I want to pause here and challenge the mechanics of that margin because there is a structural friction in their sales model. We know from the DRHP that 64% of their sales happen offline. That means the product leaves the factory, is sold to a regional distributor who obviously takes a margin cut. The distributor sells it to a local retailer who takes a margin cut. The retailer then sells it to the end consumer. If there are two middlemen taking a slice of the pie, how on earth does Atomberg maintain a 43% gross margin without the final price tag becoming completely unaffordable for the average consumer?
That is the ultimate balancing act of an omnichannel hardware brand. And the answer revolves around a concept called inventory velocity.
Okay, explain that.
Think about it from the perspective of a local hardware store owner. They have limited shelf space. If a legacy brand offers them a fan with a 20% retailer margin, but that fan sits on the shelf for 3 months gathering dust because no one is asking for it, that capital is totally trapped.
Right, the return on shelf space is terrible.
But Atomberg has built such immense digital brand awareness that consumers are walking into the store specifically requesting, say, the Atomberg Renisa model, because the product has high demand, it flies off the shelf.
So they don't need a huge margin per unit.
Exactly. The store owner might only make a 10% or 12% margin on the Atomberg fan, but they turn that inventory over every single week. High velocity generates significantly more absolute cash flow for the retailer over a year than a high-margin, slow-moving product.
Because they're selling 10 of them instead of one.
Exactly. Because Atomberg guarantees high velocity, they do not have to offer massive, desperate discounts to force distributors to carry their inventory. They maintain pricing power throughout the entire channel.
So the brand pull essentially subsidizes the middleman markup. That makes a lot of sense.
Huh.
But there is a second half to the margin equation for electronics, and that is warranty costs.
Crucially important. I mean, you can have a 50% gross margin on day one, but if you sell a complex electronic device with a 2-year warranty, and 10% of those devices fry their motherboards within the first year, your margin is retroactively destroyed.
I got to fix it for free.
You have to manufacture a replacement unit, ship it, and pay a technician to install it, all for zero additional revenue.
Which is incredibly risky in India, given the notorious volatility of the power grid. Voltage spikes just destroy electronics.
Which is exactly why Atomberg's deep tech manufacturing is so vital. By over-engineering the power electronics to withstand severe voltage fluctuations, they achieve remarkably low failure rates. The DRHP states their failure rate is just 2.54 units per 100 sold.
2.54%.
Yeah, and that exceptionally low warranty replacement rate acts as a fortress protecting that 43% gross margin.
Okay, we've analyzed how a single fan makes money. Let's zoom back out and analyze the macro revenue model. We need to dissect the 13 billion INR they generated in the 2026 financial year.
Right, so the precise figure for revenue from operations in FY26 was 12,937.67 million INR. To really understand the velocity of this company, you have to look at the growth. Just 2 years prior, in FY24, revenue was roughly 7,969 million INR.
It's climbing fast.
They have achieved a compound annual growth rate, a CAGR, of over 27%. According to the prospectus, they are the fastest growing company among listed, scaled consumer appliance manufacturers in the country.
Let's take a scalpel to that 12.9 billion revenue pie. What are the actual components driving that number?
We look at it through their 3 business segments. Segment 1 is home appliances. This is the absolute core, the ceiling fans, the pedestal fans. This segment is the cash cow, bringing in a massive 11,525.32 million INR.
Wow, so almost all of it.
It is the economic engine funding the rest of the company's ambitions.
And segment 2 is kitchen appliances. The mixer grinders, the juicers, they brought in 432.82 million INR.
But the revenue number for kitchen appliances hides a very, very important detail. This segment is currently operating at a severely negative margin, specifically a negative 34.89% segment margin.
Wait, let's stop there. They are losing almost 35 cents on every single dollar of revenue they generate in the kitchen segment. Why would a company aggressively push a product line that is burning a hole in their pocket?
Because it is a calculated aggressive growth bet. In the consumer hardware space, entering a completely new category dominated by legacy giants requires immense upfront capital.
Like R&D and marketing.
You have to design the product, build the molds, fight for shelf space in a completely different aisle of the store, and run massive marketing campaigns to convince a consumer who trusts you, for fans to suddenly trust you to grind spices.
Which isn't a natural leap for most people.
Exactly. That customer acquisition cost, the CAC, is incredibly high initially. They are heavily subsidizing this segment to buy market share and establish a foothold. They are operating on the thesis that once they reach a specific volume threshold, the economies of scale will kick in and the unit economics will flip to profitability, exactly as they did with the fan business years ago.
It's a classic land grab strategy.
Yep.
You bleed cash to acquire the territory, banking on the long-term lifetime value of the customer.
Exactly.
And segment 3 is the proprietary components division, AIPL. This brought in 373.880 million INR.
And much like the kitchen segment, AIPL is also running at a loss currently. Supplying enterprise OEMs is not a quick sales cycle. You have to build massive manufacturing capacity up front and then subject your motors to incredibly long, rigorous testing and validation cycles by the client before they ever commit to a multi-year contract.
We're jumping through a lot of hoops.
You endure the costs today for locked-in, recurring B2B revenue tomorrow.
So if we strip down their top-line growth using the standard formula, revenue equals volume multiplied by price multiplied by mix, what is actually driving the 27% CAGR?
Yeah.
Are they just artificially inflating revenue by hiking the price of their fans every 6 months?
No, the DRHP data indicates the growth is structurally very healthy because it is driven primarily by volume and mix, not just arbitrary price hikes. The volume growth is evident in their physical expansion. Growing from roughly 27,000 retail touchpoints to nearly 47,000 means they are simply putting the product in front of millions of new consumers.
And the mix aspect, what does that mean here?
Product mix refers to the ratio of low-end versus high-end items sold. Atomberg isn't just selling more of their entry-level fans. They are successfully convincing consumers to upgrade. They are selling a higher proportion of their premium scuts. The models featuring IoT connectivity, underlight fixtures, or premium wood finishes.
So people are opting for the fancier models.
Right. When a consumer walks in intending to buy a standard BLDC fan and walks out with the smart home enabled version, the average order value increases, naturally lifting both revenue and margins without just hiking base prices.
There is another metric in the revenue model that stands out as highly unusual for a hardware brand: their channel split. Roughly 64% of their revenue is generated offline and 36% is online.
Most legacy appliance brands have online sales languishing in the single digits. This 36% online penetration speaks to Atomberg's core DNA. The DRHP explicitly details their digital-first go-to-market playbook.
Walk me through the mechanics of that playbook. How do they actually execute a product launch differently than a legacy company?
Let's imagine a traditional appliance company wants to launch a radically redesigned mixer grinder. They have to manufacture tens of thousands of units, fill warehouses, and then dispatch armies of sales reps to convince offline distributors across the country to take a massive financial risk on an unproven product.
Which is terrifying.
If the product fails, the company has to take back the inventory or offer devastating discounts. It is a highly capital-intensive, high-risk proposition.
So how does Atomberg sidestep that risk?
They use the internet as a real-time, zero-risk testing sandbox. When Atomberg launches that same mixer grinder, they don't immediately push it offline. They launch it exclusively online on Amazon or their own D2C website. They run highly targeted performance marketing campaigns.
Just to test the waters.
They meticulously track the click-through rates, the conversion costs, and crucially, they analyze the early consumer reviews. They monitor exactly which PIN codes and demographics are adopting the product.
So they basically let the digital market validate the hardware first.
Exactly. And once that product has proven itself, once it has a sustained 4.5-star rating and a verifiable track record of consumer demand, Atomberg takes that empirical data directly to their offline distributors.
Oh, wow. The pitch to the distributor is completely de-risked. They don't say, please take a chance on our new mixer. They say, look at this dashboard. This mixer is already the #2 bestseller on Amazon.
Exactly.
We have hundreds of 5-star reviews, and according to our data, thousands of consumers in your specific geographic territory are already searching for it. We are going to put this proven winner on your physical shelves.
It's an undeniable pitch. They use digital channels for low-cost demand generation and product validation, and then leverage their massive offline distribution network to drive real physical volume into Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities where e-commerce penetration might be lower. It is an incredibly capital-efficient way to launch hardware and minimize inventory risk.
We've covered the what, the how, and the money. Now we arrive at the most vital question for evaluating any business operating in a crowded market. Why does this company win today? They are fighting against legacy titans who have had a 50-year head start. Why is Atomberg taking their market share?
The DRHP outlines 3 distinct competitive advantages. The first is the deep tech moat we've touched upon. It's not just the 867 million INR spent on R&D, it's how that R&D infrastructure is actually organized.
How so?
They employ a dedicated R&D team of 254 engineers. To put that in perspective, that represents over 25% of their entire permanent workforce. 1 out of every 4 permanent employees is an engineer dedicated to innovation.
That is the structural profile of a Silicon Valley software company, not a company that makes ceiling fans.
And they operate like one, particularly regarding their intellectual property architecture. The true brilliance of their moat is the concept of a shared technology platform. The foundational technology they spent years perfecting, the highly efficient BLDC motor, the miniature power electronics, the embedded control algorithms, is shared across almost their entire product portfolio.
Oh, I see the leverage there. The microcomputer brain inside their premium ceiling fan is fundamentally the exact same brain running their mixer grinder, which is fundamentally similar to the brain inside the air conditioning compressor motor they sell to an enterprise OEM.
Precisely. They do the heavy lifting of developing the core intellectual property once, and then they reap massive economies of scale by deploying it across distinct, seemingly unrelated product categories.
That's incredibly efficient.
If a traditional mixer grinder company suddenly wants to build a smart, energy-efficient fan, they have to start from absolute zero. They have to hire a new team and invent a new motor. Atomberg just takes their existing, highly refined, heavily tested BLDC platform, tweaks the torque and speed parameters in the firmware, and integrates it into a new casing. It allows them to iterate faster, cheaper, and with higher reliability than incumbents.
Which flows perfectly into their second distinct advantage, the quality metric. You mentioned the failure rate earlier, but we need to emphasize just how critical that number is.
The DRHP states they have the lowest product failure rate in the industry for next-generation BLDC fans, sitting at 2.54 units per 100 sold.
A 2.5% failure rate for a complex electromechanical device containing microprocessors constantly subjected to the notorious voltage spikes and brownouts of the Indian power grid is just an engineering marvel. But beyond the engineering pride, what does that mean for the business?
It means they aren't just selling a slick marketing story fueled by venture capital. They are selling a fundamentally superior piece of hardware that refuses to break. The financial implications are twofold. First, as we discussed, it protects their gross margins by slashing warranty replacement costs.
And second,
it builds an impenetrable wall of brand loyalty. Think about the consumer psychology. If you buy an Atomberg fan and it runs silently, efficiently, and flawlessly for 5 years without a single hiccup, when your kitchen mixer grinder finally dies, who are you going to trust?
You default to Atomberg.
Exactly.
The engineering quality becomes a compounding marketing engine that lowers the customer acquisition cost for every subsequent product launch.
And speaking of marketing, that is their third distinct advantage, marketing efficiency. While legacy brands are still heavily reliant on fragmented, expensive offline advertising, Atomberg allocates roughly 42% of its entire ad spend specifically to highly targeted digital channels. They have constructed a sophisticated, data-driven marketing engine capable of targeting roughly 295 million consumers annually.
So they aren't just buying full-page spreads in national newspapers and hoping someone sees it.
No. They deploy programmatic performance marketing, they leverage social media influencers, they utilize connected TV ads. They have an internal creative team churning out nearly 100 new optimized ad assets every single month. They A/B test constantly.
It works.
The results are undeniable. The DRHP notes that through these digital campaigns, they boosted their top-of-mind brand awareness from a mere 10% to 46% in a matter of months.
Wow.
That is a staggering velocity of brand salience. They have effectively brute forced their way into the consumer consciousness, standing shoulder to shoulder with legacy brands that have been ubiquitous for half a century.
Okay, so the case is clear. They are winning today. The premium ceiling fan market is practically theirs to lose. But an IPO is a forward-looking event. Public market investors do not pay a premium for what you accomplished yesterday. They are paying for what you will conquer tomorrow. Investors reading this DRHP want to know, what is the catalyst that makes this business significantly larger? And conversely, what are the existential risks that could make the whole machine grind to a halt?
Let's map out the upside first, how they make it bigger. The first major avenue for massive expansion is the realization of the Atomberg home ecosystem.
We've mentioned they're moving into kitchen appliances, but reading between the lines of the DRHP, the vision seems much more expansive than just selling a blender.
They are looking at the entire footprint of the household. They are exploring kitchen chimneys, built-in hobs, and fully integrated smart home ecosystems. Imagine a near-future scenario where your ceiling fan, your front door smart lock, your water purifier, and your kitchen chimney are all interconnected, communicating with each other, and controlled centrally via the Atomberg Home app.
That ecosystem approach exponentially increases the lifetime value of the customer. If I have already downloaded the app and integrated it into my daily routine to control my fan and monitor who is at my front door, the friction to buy their water purifier next is practically zero. It creates an incredibly high switching cost. Why would I buy a competitor's appliance and clutter my phone with a separate clunky app?
Precisely. They are aiming to become the underlying intelligent infrastructure of the modern Indian household. But the second upside, and frankly, this might be the most lucrative hidden gem within the entire DRHP, is the B2B wildcard.
AIPL, the proprietary components division supplying enterprise motors.
Yes. Right now, it represents a tiny fraction of their revenue, and it operates at a loss. It's easy to overlook. But consider the macro environment we discussed. Every single appliance manufacturer globally is under immense regulatory and consumer pressure to transition to highly efficient BLDC motors.
Right, they don't have a choice.
Atomberg has already spent a decade building, perfecting, and stress testing these exact motors. By supplying drone motors, refrigerator compressors, and air conditioning motors to other massive OEMs, they are effectively hedging their entire consumer business.
I see the strategy. It's brilliant. If a competitor somehow outmarkets the Atomberg brand in the consumer juicer category, it might not even matter to Atomberg's bottom line. Why? Because Atomberg might be the company quietly manufacturing and supplying the high-tech motor inside that competitor's juicer.
It is the classic Intel inside strategy. If they can successfully scale AIPL manufacturing and win those enterprise contracts, Atomberg transitions from merely being a fast-growing consumer brand to becoming the indispensable foundational hardware platform powering the entire appliance industry.
That is an upside worth billions. But we have to remain objective and scrutinize the bear case. What are the structural risks? What could cause this entire operation to fail?
The DRHP is, by legal necessity, very transparent about the risk factors. Risk 1 is what we can classify as the one-trick pony problem, or severe concentration risk.
Because despite the aggressive expansion into smart locks, juicers, and enterprise motors, the reality of the FY26 financial statements is pretty stark. Out of their 13 billion INR in total revenue, Over 11.5 billion is derived solely from the home appliances segment, which is overwhelmingly just ceiling fans.
They are highly dangerously concentrated in a single product category. If there is a sudden macroeconomic downturn and discretionary consumer spending dries up, meaning people stop paying premiums for smart fans, Atomberg's revenue plummets.
Or if a competitor catches up.
Exactly. Furthermore, if a deep-pocketed legacy competitor finally cracks the BLDC code, achieves manufacturing parity, and decides to aggressively undercut Atomberg on price to win back market share, Atomberg is fully exposed. They have yet to definitively prove they can replicate their dominant fan success in the kitchen segment.
Risk 2 is something we touched on during the value chain discussion: global supply chain vulnerability.
This is a critical vulnerability for any deep tech hardware manufacturer. Remember that exceptional 43% gross margin? That margin is entirely dependent on sourcing specific raw materials at specific prices. Atomberg is heavily reliant on imported semiconductors, integrated circuits, and permanent magnets, specifically neodymium magnets, which are predominantly sourced from China.
Components that are highly susceptible to global geopolitical volatility.
Exactly. If trade tensions escalate and tariffs on imported Chinese electronics or rare earth metals skyrocket overnight, or if there is another global semiconductor supply chain shock, Atomberg's input costs will literally explode.
And they can't just raise prices indefinitely.
Right, because they operate in a consumer market, they might not be able to immediately pass those increased costs onto the end user without destroying demand. That would instantly compress or even obliterate that beautiful 43% margin.
Risk 3 revolves around channel conflict. We praised their online to offline validation strategy earlier, but it is a delicate tightrope walk.
It is arguably their most difficult operational challenge, as they naturally push harder into direct-to-consumer digital sales via their own website because avoiding middleman markups yields the highest profit margins. They risk alienating their massive network of 626 offline distributors.
Oh, I see.
If a local shopkeeper sees Atomberg offering a 20% flash sale discount on Amazon that the shopkeeper cannot match in-store without taking a loss, that shopkeeper will revolt.
They'll just stop selling it.
They will pull Atomberg products off the premier shelf space and push a competitor instead. Managing pricing parity and maintaining relationships across multiple digital platforms and tens of thousands of physical stores requires extreme discipline. If the offline channel feels betrayed, 64% of their revenue is at risk.
And that brings us to risk 4.
Yeah.
The absolute elephant in the room. We have spent an hour discussing a company with 13 billion INR in revenue, massive 27% year-over-year growth, and unit economics boasting a 43% gross margin.
Yeah.
Yet, if you scroll down to the restated financial statements for FY26, well, the company lost money. They posted a restated net loss of 1,488.81 million INR.
It is a highly significant loss, representing roughly 11% of their total revenue.
I have to push back incredibly hard here.
Yeah.
If they are the undisputed market leader in premium BLDC fans, and they possess unit margins that are 13 percentage points higher than the industry average, shouldn't they be printing free cash flow by now? Is it just the classic fatal startup trap of buying top-line revenue growth through unsustainable marketing and R&D spend? When does the music stop, and how much runway do they have before they hit a wall?
It is the most critical, pointed question any potential investor will ask. And to understand the loss, we have to look past the headline number and really dissect the operating leverage. The nuanced view, based on a granular reading of the DRHP, is that this loss is the result of a conscious strategic capital allocation choice, not the symptom of a fundamentally broken business model.
Unpack the mechanics of that choice. Where is the $1.5 billion going?
We have to look at the segment profitability. The core home appliances segment, the fan business, is actually generating positive segment results. It is a highly profitable, self-sustaining economic engine.
Okay, so the core business works.
Yes, the net loss at the corporate level is occurring because management is choosing to take all the cash generated by the fan business and aggressively dump it into two massive capital-intensive sinks: the kitchen appliances segment and the proprietary components B2B segment.
Right. Those were the two segments we analyzed earlier that were intentionally running at deeply negative margins, like negative 35% in the case of kitchen appliances.
Exactly. They are spending vast amounts of capital on R&D to engineer entirely new product lines. They are building out massive new manufacturing capacity at the Chingakan plant years ahead of actual demand to ensure they can scale instantly. And most importantly, they are deploying immense marketing capital to establish brand authority in the highly competitive kitchen space. It is a textbook land grab strategy.
So the thesis is this: Management believes the lifetime value of capturing dominant market share in the kitchen and enterprise B2B categories far outweighs the pain of short-term quarterly losses. They're intentionally suppressing profitability today to build a multi-category, multi-billion-dollar empire tomorrow.
That is the exact strategic bet. They are banking on the assumption that once the kitchen and B2B segments achieve sufficient scale and brand recognition, the customer acquisition costs will plummet, the aggressive marketing spend can be tapered down, and those inherent 43% gross margins will finally be allowed to flow unencumbered all the way down to the bottom line.
But the risk is execution timing. Can they execute that pivot to profitability before they exhaust their cash reserves, before public market investors lose patience, or before a legacy giant wakes up and crushes them in the kitchen segment?
That is the multi-million-dollar question the IPO will ultimately answer.
Okay, let's pull all of these threads together. We have journeyed through an incredibly dense and revealing DRHP. We started with a narrative about a group of IIT Bombay engineering graduates doing institutional R&D projects, and we end up looking at a digital-first, omni-channel, vertically integrated manufacturing juggernaut, a company that looked at the most boring, invisible appliance in your house, the ceiling fan, and fundamentally redefined it using the power electronics of an electric vehicle.
And if there is one central unifying thesis to take away from this entire analysis, it is this. Atomberg's true enterprise value does not reside in the physical ceiling fan or the smart lock or the mixer grinder itself. Those appliances are merely the physical vessels used to deliver the technology.
Right.
The true defensible value of this business is the proprietary deep tech platform they have painstakingly built. The microscopic BLDC motor architectures, the complex power electronics, the embedded firmware. That foundational, adaptable technology platform is what generates the 43% gross margins, what drives the 2.5% failure rates, and what provides them the unique ability to endlessly scale into entirely new adjacent markets.
To summarize it perfectly, they aren't an appliance company. They're a deep tech engineering platform that just happens to monetize its intellectual property by selling household appliances.
I couldn't have stated it better.
So, to you listening, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. Atomberg looked at the ceiling fan, a product that hadn't fundamentally changed its mechanical operation in over a century, a product that every consumer and legacy manufacturer entirely ignored, and they built a deep tech empire out of it simply by radically rethinking the intelligence of the motor. Look around your home or look around your office right now. What other invisible, boring, completely taken for granted piece of hardware is just sitting there in the background, waiting for someone to come along and completely reinvent its brain and muscle?